The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Big Ben Haslar presiding. Your eyes for the Honorable Judge Haslar. Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of the People versus Rawhead Rex. This 1986 horror film follows writer Howard Hollenbeck as he hunts a monstrous demon that is terrorizing an Irish village. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always in this courtroom, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond the shadow of a reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Maynard Bangs, you are appearing on behalf of the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. Distinguished members of the court, Rawhead Rex started out as a 1985 short story included in the third volume of Clive Barker's successful Books of Blood series. Now, at the time, Barker was basically in the position of being one of the most successful horror authors working, and even received praise from Stephen King as being the future of horror. And when the call was made to adapt his short story into a feature-length film, they actually got Clive Barker to write the screenplay. Can you imagine that? You get one of the world's most successful authors to adapt his own story into a screenplay? Well, how can you fail, right? Well, Rawhead Rex managed to do just that by keeping Barker at a great distance. They did not take any of his input into the design or themes of the film. Hell, Barker never even went to the set. And the resulting mess is such a total misrepresentation of both the source material and the screenplay that not only has Barker completely disowned the film, he made sure he kept his hands very tightly over the next film project he worked on, the wildly successful Hellraiser, which was adapted from another book of his. And that's also he wrote and directed. So there you go. That is the difference between adhering to the vision of your author, screenwriter, and not. In one, you get Rawhead Rex, and in the other, you get Hellraiser. I think that speaks volumes right there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bangs. Appearing on behalf of the defense is Mr. Billy Ray Brewton. Please present your opening statement.
I was 12 years old. It was a rainy Alabama night. I knew nothing about Rawhead Rex other than the VHS looked dope. And on that night, my young queer life would be forever changed. Rawhead Rex jogged so Pumpkinhead could walk. Now, don't get me wrong. Pumpkinhead is a great monster movie. So is Rawhead Rex. The subtext of Rawhead Rex is what sticks with me all these years later. Listening to the prosecution talk about Barker's lack of involvement in the project begs the question, why is that a bad thing? Have we forgotten that Clive Barker has a spotty track record in the film industry? I don't know that having him more involved in the project would have been beneficial to this particular project. Yes, he would go on to make Hellraiser. Yes, he would go on to make Lord of Illusions. He would also go on to make a lot of other films that we're going to talk about later in this episode.
Oh, no.
And so I don't know that that's necessarily a slight. I'm going to sum it up to say that if you were a queer person growing up in the 1980s and you saw Rawhead Rex, you tapped into something with that film that maybe you didn't even know what it was at the time. And maybe years later, when you finished reading all of Clive Barker's work, you really got the sense of what that film was trying to do, with or without his involvement. And to that, I say, on with the debate.
Very well. On with it. Mr. Maynard, you may present your first exhibit.
Well, my first exhibit is the twofold problem of the creature's design. The first is the failed execution of Clive Barker's vision, coming from his book and even from his screenplay. And what he envisioned is for Rawhead to be a phallic symbol. right? Literally, he wanted the monster to look like a giant penis. Not a subtle illusion, very clearly something super phallic. He said in a 1987 interview with Nexus magazine, he said, "Monster on the Rampage stories are about the phallic principle. Large males run around terrorizing women. Now, the gag only works if you understand the subtext. When this thing appeared, you had to think it was a dick. But they didn't get the joke. And it was a joke. That was the point." End quote. Now, once you take away this satirical element, and it's clearly supposed to be satire, it's supposed to be funny, and again, I'll quote Barker one last time here, it's about this dumb monster running around. Essentially, the film was neutered from the start, likely because it was produced in the mid-'80s at the height of the video nasty scare, and the filmmakers probably feared censorship. But a lot of this movie doesn't make any sense once you take the phallic element away. Not only do you lose the satirical point in the film, the idea that Rawhead's weakness is an idol of a pregnant woman, it's yonic symbolism, that's completely lost. The scene where Rawhead urinates on the face of his willing disciple, that doesn't really make sense without this. A giant cock pissing on its minion's face, it's still bizarre and funny, but how else would a giant cock anoint its followers? But literally, right? In the book, by the way, I believe he ejaculates on him instead of piss.
Ew.
But why is that? That's worse. But take away the phallus design, and it's just gross and jarring, and it is still funny, but now we're laughing at it and not with it.
Okay. Mr. Billy Ray, would you care to comment on the potential penis envy of this monster?
Absolutely. I had many objections throughout that, but I figured I'd just save them all for the end because I didn't want to interrupt the word flow. You mentioned that it fails as a phallic symbol. I would argue the exact opposite. It might not be as phallic as Clive Barker wanted it, but then again, we all don't wish that everyone was running around in cock costumes like Clive Barker does. But what they do manage to do with the creature, I believe, is quite phallic, and that was something that I picked up on even as a 12-year-old. And I think that's part of what lends this film to sort of the queer lore that it's undertaken, is because of that phallic symbol. And you say that Clive Barker says it's just a dumb monster, it's about a dumb monster running around. Yeah, that is kind of it. It is about a dumb monster running around. But this dumb monster has no fucks to give in terms of the chaos that he is inflicting. And yes, I understand why some might be tempted to ridicule the Rawhead Rex design. But just because he toned down the queerness doesn't mean it's not there. The more you experience the Rawhead Rex creature, for me, the more hypnotic and frightening it becomes. In a particularly chilling moment, the American historian sees the creature standing atop a hill holding a severed head. And it's that sort of chance encounter that exemplifies the randomness and the chaos of the rampage that takes place in the film. Maybe it wasn't phallic enough for the prosecution's taste.
It wasn't. Or Clive Barker. It wasn't damn near phallic enough for me.
Again, I don't need Clive Barker's input in this. Like, Clive Barker has done nothing to make me think that he needs to have much involvement in anything that he does. I will say this. As a homosexual man, I was just fine with the level of phallic in this film. And I think any more than that would have been... I know we're saying it was satire, and I'm sure it was. I'm sure the book was nothing but a big, jam-packed ball of satire.
And
balls of satire.
Bag balls of satire, but, the movie is its own beast. And for what they managed to do to my 12-year-old queer heart, I'm going to cherish that for a very long time, and I think a lot of queer people will cherish it as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me... I don't see phallic when I see the monster any more than any upright, tall, standing person is phallic, right? I mean, yes,
you need to look at more penises, sir.
They're long. If you could show,
let's go to the charts.
If you could show me what penises have long metal hair on the top and ripped abs in the middle, then I mean, I haven't seen enough.
I once fucked a guy who had Alice Cooper tattooed on his dick. That, to me, is the type of energy that Rawhead Rex is throwing out. That Alice Cooper dick tattoo energy.
Yes, it was probably the cover for Elected. Sorry. Now, the other half of my problem here with the costume is the actual execution of the monster costume. So instead of looking like a huge penis, as we talked about, it's designed as some kind of it's an ogre looking creature with big, red, bright, glowing eyes and huge teeth. And it's a strange choice if you know that Rawhead is an actual boogeyman-like figure from folklore, sometimes called Bloody Bones, that dates way back into like the 1500s. It's basically a story that's meant to keep kids in line, right? Like Rawhead will get you if you tell lies or say bad words or you go near certain dangerous pools of water. Basically meant to scare kids straight, right? So sometimes it's described as a water demon or as a crouching apparition or a skull with no skin on its face. That's one of my favorites. So there's a rich history to draw from. And this film uses none of that. And granted, Barker didn't draw from it in his book. Even in his book, besides the penis head, Rawhead is described as slender and long, sinewy, not muscular, not bulky. He's not a chode. You know, he is slender and long, and they did not go with that even in the design. So he's just this really weird, generic kind of ogre-looking troll.
I would say that the prosecution is spending way too much time on what they think the film should have been and should be spending more time on what the film actually is.
And, that's fair.
And I will say that there is a dark and foreboding feeling that I get now with that creature design that I never got when I was a kid. When I was a kid and I saw the Rawhead Rex design, I, like most people, was like, okay, this looks like a rejected Ninja Turtles villain. This is, or something from Power Rangers. But the older I've gotten,
it was nowhere near as good as some Power Rangers.
And so, and some of the sequence in this film, I just find to be absolutely haunting. And that's with that design there. And, you know, I'm a sucker for any film that is sort of based on folklore, that is based on this mythology. And I think where this film and this creature design succeeds is in a way that you can only do in the 1980s. Like, there are, you know, the 1980s produced so many iconic monsters, so many iconic creatures, but 90% of them don't work throughout the whole 80s. There's a handful of creature designs that have stood the test of time and that have sort of become like iconic and sort of like dominated the culture. Yes, Rawhead Rex is not one of those.
No.
Rawhead Rex is not one of those like genre defining creatures. But I think where it succeeds is how outside the box. I mean, they went for it. They went for it on this design. It is one thing to say, fuck you, Clive Barker, we're going to go in a totally different design than the creature that is in your book. But then to do that with the kind of like whimsy and zeal that they approach this monster with, I'm kind of floored by that. I appreciate the fact that they went for it. And I think now, like I said, years later, I find it far more terrifying now than I ever did as a kid. And I think it just goes to show that you can do a lot with a little, even if the design isn't exactly maybe what the creator wanted it to be. And I think Rawhead Rex is a good example of that. But, you know, there's far more about this film than the creature design to discuss, but I'll let the prosecution dive into those waters.
But I found it interesting, you know, you say you like a film that was drawn from folklore. Since Rawhead has most of its history in a kid's boogeyman story, I mean, Rawhead is just dropped in our laps about 8 minutes into this movie. Why couldn't we have had a few scenes of one kid teasing another kid about Rawhead's going to get them, so that when the Rawhead monster shows up, we know what the hell we're supposed to be expecting? Suddenly, it's just this monster that emerges out of the ground, and the priest says Rawhead. Well, I'm not British, and I don't know who Rawhead is. I don't know he's a boogeyman monster who haunts the countryside. Oh, it would have been great to have some sort of scene of two kids interacting like that, which would have set up Rawhead killing the kid later, because he does get to kill a kid later, which is the one little small anchor to that folklore story.
I would again say I would rather spend my time talking about what this movie is.
I would love to talk about what this movie is if it was something or did
it is something.
More.
Oh, it absolutely is something. It absolutely is something. But I'm saving my exhibits for my time to shine.
That's good. That's good. So now this costume, to talk about what it was. Well, it was made in about 4 weeks. It's done all as a single piece with latex skin. You can basically see the plastic seams on it. When the man inside the costume has to run, it's obvious that it's just a big head thing on top of his head because it bobs up and down Like it kind of looks like the inflatable T-Rex. You know, the inflatable T-Rex Halloween costume where the person stares out the chest and the head sort of lolls backwards as the chest leans forward to run. It's like that for a whole movie. Now, when you have a bad monster costume, and it's a bad monster costume, it is, you have to work creatively around that problem. Sure.
Objection.
Mm-hmm.
What's your objection?
Oh, just that you're wrong.
Fair.
Got him.
But the thing is,
overruled because it is clearly a puppet.
you have to work creatively around that problem, right? Like Jaws, we all know when the shark breaks, creative solutions in filmmaking were needed to salvage the projects, and they did them. It's part of why that film is such a miracle, but Rawhead Rex makes none of those same choices. The costume doesn't look all that bad. Billy Ray early mentioned one of the shots where he looks across a field and sees it. That's actually one of the times where it looks really good. Well, not really good, but good enough. And
passable.
Yeah. It's this menacing shape with bright red glowing eyes. It's quite tolerable. But the film doesn't shoot Rawhead from a distance all that often. Instead, it actually opts for a ton of close-ups and very well-lit shots of Rawhead. And close-up, he looks like a fucking Muppet hopped up on meth or something. And the film won't stop showing it. You basically see an excellent shot of this monster, like 8 minutes in the movie you see this. And you see it a lot over the next hour and a half. He gets a lot of screen time.
Mr. Brewton, are they a little too proud of their practical design here?
I don't know that they're too proud of it. I think they know exactly what they have, which I think is why this film sort of toes the line between like religious horror and sheer camp. And I think that's what a lot of 80s horror films did. Like, I think back to a lot of iconic 80s monsters designs. I think back to even something like A Nightmare on Elm Street. Freddy's costume design in that film changes drastically from scene to scene in terms of quality. And that's one of the greatest horror films ever made. I think a lot of that has to do with the budget. I think, they were probably constrained to some degree and were working with what they had to work with. I'm sure, I doubt they just completely tossed Clive Barker's wishes out the window just willy-nilly. There might have been reasons behind it. I would have tossed him out just because it's Clive Barker and I don't have a lot of trust in him as a filmmaker. But I'm sure a lot of it had to do with budget. And I think for what they were working with, I think they shoot it effectively. Yes, they shoot some close-ups. And yes, it looks like a costume monster. Again, welcome to the 80s. Like, at some point, we just have to accept... At some point, we have to accept that this was the 1980s. That's what the majority of horror monster movies looked like. And
this movie came after Alien. It came after The Thing.
I said the majority. I didn't say like you're naming exceptions to the rule. I don't disagree with you, but you're naming exceptions to the rule.
Yes, this thing probably is on par with Extra.
Like,
you're right.
The majority of films from the 1980s did not have creature designs on par with Alien. Like,
yes.
The only ones that did were also done by Stan Winston. And so I don't think that's a fair way, because so far all we've talked about is the creature design, and this film is much more than that creature design.
Well, the creature design stuck in my craw, but I'll move on to a different sort of topic, although they're still slightly kind of tied in. Rawhead Rex is defeated in the end. I mean, basically, he kind of rampages for an hour and a half. One of the high points is he kills the protagonist's son. That was probably one of the better parts. Although it's off camera, I understand they couldn't show me massacring the son. Would have been cool though. That would have stepped the movie up a little. But he does get to kill the son, which is already a bold choice for that time period. So kudos to that. That's a good thing. I liked that. But he is defeated in the end by an idol of a pregnant woman who is wielded by Elaine Hallenbach, and she's the wife of the film's protagonist, Howard. And I say wife of the protagonist because Elaine isn't really a protagonist herself. She's definitely a supporting character, and the film mostly follows around her husband for a majority of the film. So if this film is supposed to be about this symbolic power of the feminine overcome the masculine, the yonic and the phallic, why doesn't Elaine play a more prominent part in this film? Why isn't she the protagonist? She could have just as easily been the historian in this story instead of her husband. This, again, I don't want to bring it up because I know we don't like it, but the film could have taken a cue from Alien and pit a strong female protagonist against a phallic monster, because there's another phallic monster, and executed its themes a lot better. And the other female characters aren't given anything much better to do either. You have the pregnant woman in the beginning. That Rawhead Rex can't harm pregnant women. He's like a reverse Scott Peterson. And
Oh,
she's
boo!
too soon.
Wow.
and she's basically driven insane from fear. And there's a young teenage girl who first spends all her screen time being groped unwillingly by her boyfriend. He gets comeuppance from Rawhead, but not really from her. She actually starts to like it. And then the rest, she screams in terror. And then you have the woman in the recreational vehicle who seems to be there only for gratuitous nudity. And don't get me wrong, I love gratuitous nudity. I think I cheered when it happened. But this is the most gratuitous nudity I've seen in a while. She isn't skinny dipping or taking a shower. She's not pre or post coitus. She's just sitting in an RV, and then Rawhead grabs her and pulls her out a window, tearing her shirt off in the process, exposing her breasts, which the camera has absolutely no qualms about focusing on as she is mauled to death. Is this the movie about feminine power?
Well, I would say, first of all, again, welcome to the 80s. Secondly, I would say this movie isn't anything about feminine power. This film is a multitude of queer allegories. So you ask, why isn't Elaine the protagonist? Because in my mind, it wouldn't make sense for Elaine to be the protagonist. I see this film in a lot of different ways. I think you can view this film from the mindset of Rawhead being the sort of monster manifestation of repressed homosexuality, which is certainly a way that I viewed it when I was younger. I think now that I've gotten older and been more immersed in the queer community, I think there are also some trans reads that you can make on this film. I think both of which would be logical to make, considering Clive Barker's previous work and the queerness that runs through all of his work, because he is one of the preeminent queer storytellers out there.
Well, but Barker's Rawhead is misogynistic.
I'm not discussing the book today. I'm discussing the movie.
Okay, we were just talking about Barker's one, but go on. Go on. You brought up Barker a moment ago, but go on.
Well, yes, but I mean, I find this film to be filled with queer allegories from beginning to end, and I think, the Elaine character does not get a lot to do. Neither do any of the female characters in here. I agree with that 100%. I think, obviously, if this movie was being made today, that would be different, and we wouldn't have shots of tits just because. But this was the 1980s. It was the mid-1980s, and this is what horror films were. These are things that helped sell horror films for better or worse. And as far as they go, and let's also not forget the folk horror element of this film. This is a folk horror film. I mean, beginning to end, it is a folk horror film. It features all the tenets of folk horror, but stuffed inside a monster movie. It has the same kind of slow burn as Eyes of Fire. It has the same attention to landscape and atmosphere as something like The Wicker Man, and the kind of old world feel that you would find in like Witchfinder General. And again, a lot of that queerness is toned down, but it is there throughout this folk horror package. And I think, looking at it and being like, well, why didn't they make her the protagonist? Why didn't they make this? That wasn't the movie they were trying to make. And the movie that they made is a very bizarre, very queer monster movie that is honestly probably more innately queer on the surface in this version than what it would have been if they had gone in Clive Barker's direction, which I kind of applaud them for.
Well, I can see some of the queer symbolism in like the preacher follower, who kind of worships the not as phallic a monster as I'd like, the somewhat phallic monster, but not as phallic as it could be monster. But I don't see the symbolism in the fact that the monster is defeated and ultimately imprisoned by a symbol of a pregnant woman, which only and it can only be in the movie, it has to be wielded by a woman. In the book, a man can wield it, and actually he uses to like crush Rawhead's skull in. But in the book or in the movie, they make the deliberate choice that it only has that power in the hands of a woman. So I'm just looking for where that fits into the queer symbolism.
I mean, if you want to think about it in terms of trans representation, and you want to think about Rawhead Rex as sort of a manifestation of the other when it comes to a trans person or a queer person, then I think it makes all the sense in the world that it would have to be a woman that then defeats the creature at the end. Now, if you're looking at it from the terms of like, repressed homosexuality. Like, let's say, because in my mind, when I was younger, a lot of what I thought Rawhead Rex was that repressed homosexuality from that priest that was then manifested on the world in the form of this creature. And so if you're, I'm a gay person myself. And so, and I know where the mindset of Hollywood and horror was in the mid 80s in terms of queerness and queer characters. So I know what they would have thought at the time would have made the most sense. And for me, if I'm telling this sort of allegory about repressed homosexuality, okay, I'm going to have a woman be the one who sort of deals with that. And I'm not saying that that's right. I'm saying that's actually backwards thinking. But it makes sense to me in terms of where we were as a filmmaking society back in the mid 80s.
So is the Idol and Elaine, are they like a conversion therapy?
I mean, that depends on how you want to look at it. I mean, that's an interesting way to look at it, as if they are conversion therapy. I don't think they quite meet the Jesus camp requirements.
Okay. I'm not following this argumentation, but I'll let the jury chew on it.
Really?
Mr. Maynard, did you have any other exhibits?
Would you stay hip with the times like I do? Okay, well,
I want to escape the Ronald Reagan era.
I hadn't really considered it being the priests, because he's fairly a minor character too. I mean, he is a minion. I mean, it's Howard who's the protagonist. So, and when you were talking about repressed homosexuality, I was thinking, oh, Howard is a repressed homosexual. I was like, well, maybe he is.
There's a read on that. Yeah, there's a read that you can make on Howard as a homosexual, and Rawhead Rex being the manifestation of that homosexuality that is trying to crush everything in his life that is making him heterosexual. Like, what are we going to do? We're going to take away his kid. We're going to do all of these things that are the embodiment of his manhood, and we're going to take it away. So that's certainly a read that you can make.
It's an interesting read. I don't know that I entirely agree with it, only because, again, I hate to go back to Barker's book. I don't know how this filmmaker decided to leave it, but in Barker's book, to me, this was all about paganism and pagan symbols and the masculine phallic sort of religious symbols versus a lot of the pagan rituals that would have been more about fertility and yonic symbols, and how we're living in a misogynistic society that Rawhead represents. And Rawhead is very violent. He's very, even in the book, he's very violent. He's rapacious. He's brutal. And he represses women, right? And that's the symbolism of the church, hiding the symbol in the church there. It's why they're hiding the idol. That's a parallel to like the church today repressing femininity, repressing female power, keeping women down. That was the symbolism I saw in the film of Rawhead basically being that untethered, masculine, misogynistic, natural power, and how it can only be overcome by its not really mirror opposite, but it's this other equal, strong, although currently repressed force in society. That's the way I read it, Your Honor.
No.
But Mr. Brewton has obviously a different reading, and I can't really say it's not there. But that was, I think, originally what Barker was going for, and it's interesting to see that maybe these filmmakers did change it. But on that, I will rest my case, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Maynard. Mr. Brewton, you may present your first exhibit.
So, why don't we start with performances? So the film's directed by George Pavlo, and Rawhead Rex definitely toes
that name
the line.
rings a bell.
No,
Stop it!
I want that stricken from the record.
Mistrial right now.
I'll take a no. Rawhead Rex toes the line between religious drama and camp, and I think that is best exemplified by a pair of performances. The first is David Dukes as Howard Hallenbeck, who is, the American historian. Is sort of a very straight-laced, cis white guy husband until he has to get more worked up because, a motherfucking monster just gobbled his boy. And then there's Ronan Wilmot as Declan O'Brien, who is the tormented priest who seems to have this psychic bond with Rawhead Rex, who's causing so much havoc around the countryside. Those are very starkly different performances. But I think what they show are sort of the two polar extremes of this film, where you do have this film that is wanting to be this very almost traditional folk horror tale, but then you also have this film that is wanting to play up the camp and wanting to play up the sort of dare I say, ridiculousness of sort of the sequences. And I wonder if part of that is because they knew that what they had in terms of the creature design was going to be divisive. Like, I think they probably knew going into this, that creature design, that some people were going to be into it and some people were going to think that it was, that they could lampoon the hell out of it. And I think some of what you get in the tone of this film, and I'm saying this is a positive, not a negative, because I like films that take wild tonal shifts. And I think you get that in this film because of that uncertainty, a lot of it doing with the creature, maybe a lot of the uncertainty with how they were adapting, from Clive Barker. But I think some of that trepidatiousness has actually benefited the film because those wild swings work for me in this. Like, there's moments like I said, where you see Rawhead on the hill that I think are truly chilling. And then there are moments when you see Rawhead during like the Trailer Park Massacre where you're like, holy shit, this is Bebop and Rocksteady killing a bunch of British rednecks. And I go for that. I go for that mid 80s combination of horror and cheese. Like, that's my bread and butter. My favorite films from the 80s are the films that find ways to blend that. And I think Rawhead Rex does it.
Mr. Maynard, does this have that 80s charm?
I don't know if I'd call it charm. It definitely checks a lot of the 80s trope boxes. But I don't know if that's necessarily a great thing.
I would argue that given the time that it came out, that checking those boxes is a good thing for this film. Now, I'm taking myself back to the mid-'80s right now and thinking about this film when it was made, why decisions were probably made. And I think that's how we answer a lot of qualms that people may have with the film now, is we can look back in that lens and think about when it was made and why those decisions were made. Again, if Rawhead Rex was made today, I think we would see a much different take on it. That's probably more true to what Clive Barker wanted. It probably would amp up the sexuality and the phallic nature and the queerness. But, that's not where we were, especially in, Britain in the 1980s. We were dealing with video nasties. We were dealing with all of these, these sort of outside influences, crushing in on the creative. And so to some degree, we have to just look at what the finished product is and weigh that against what they were going through at the time.
Okay. Did you have another exhibit to bring forward?
I do have another exhibit to bring forward. I'm going to call this the attitude, because this film has zero fucks to give. The body count attributed to Rawhead Rex is oppressive. He even kills a small child right in front of his father, gobbling the boy up as he drags him into the woods. Yes, it doesn't go as far as that sequence could have gone, but I understand, given the time, why they did it. The film treats Rawhead Rex as almost this great cleanser, like this creature summoned from the depths of hell to wipe the countryside clean of those unwilling to respect the boundaries between nature and man, which I think is another read on this film. There are a lot of reads you can make on this film. You could also read, like I said, the subdued homosexual urges and the summoning of these repressed desires. So many reads. And I think you mentioned something earlier, the prosecution did, about the masculinity. And I think that is an entirely valid read, that Rawhead Rex represents toxic masculinity. Mm-hmm. I think that is an entirely valid read, especially now. Like, even thinking about the film now, I'm like, yeah, that reads for my brain. And I think regardless of how you read the film, I think what you have to appreciate is that this is a film that was derived from a very specific source material, from a very specific author. And it said, you know what? We think there are some more interesting ways to take this material. And wild as it may be, but I respond well to that attitude. I respond to the attitude of a film that says, you know what? I'm going to come right up to the brink of killing a pregnant woman and then not. I'm going to devour.
If only Scott Peterson had done the same. All right, sorry.
Oh,
Jesus!
Wow!
If you do that one more time, I'll hold you in contempt,
okay,
prosecution.
I'll try, Your Honor, but it's so hard.
I'm going to devour a small child just for the fuck of it, and do it gleefully. Like, the way that scene is composed is like this total fuck you to the dad. Like, it's the whole thing. It's like Rawhead Rex is like rubbing it in his face. Like, I'm surprised they didn't have him like spit one of the boy's eyeballs at the dad.
Me too.
It's very much a
close-up.
Very much a fuck you. And like, the fucking trailer park attack scene is just a thing of beauty.
It's just chaos.
It is absolute chaos incarnate, and I love it. I love the idea of a trailer park being taken down by something other than a tornado, and this film gives you that. I just think the attitude is amazing for this film. I think the Rawhead Rex monster design actually looks appropriate given the attitude of this film, which is kind of zero fucks to give.
But it's zero fucks to give in quotes, right? Because they do give a fuck about the video nasty stuff, right? They are afraid of censorship. They were afraid to go as far as Barker's visions. So it's there's some fucks to give.
Well, but there's the difference there. I'll let you continue, then I'll.
Yeah, and then and as far as again, we had different reads on this. I took this more as definitely like the pagan and even modern, religious and social, masculine versus feminine, and backed up by Barker's source material as well. Rawhead traditionally in the book, he largely just hurts women and largely just hurts children. He doesn't tend to hurt other men as much. They tend to become more of his disciples, right? And like the cop that he drives crazy. I think he might end up killing him in the book, but largely he's just hurting and really raping women a lot. He is complete toxic masculinity, and that's all cranked up in the book. And then in the movie, it's mostly men he kills. He does go after a couple of women here, but like, you know, the boyfriend and girlfriend in the trailer park in the woods, he only gets the boyfriend, right? The girl gets away, seemingly inexplicably, as does the little kid. So it seems if they were going for the read I was getting, the masculine feminine, that they really left that by making most of his victims men.
I don't disagree with anything that you just said. And I think that that's okay. I think it's okay that they made those decisions and that they made those changes. Let's be clear. This is not Clive Barker's Rawhead Rex. It has his name on it. It is not his. And so we have to get out of this mindset that it's Clive Barker's Rawhead Rex.
Strike it from the record, Your Honor. Please keep that in your...
His name is in the credits, I'm afraid.
Oh, that's fine. But, you know, there are a lot of writers whose names are in the credits that those films are not their works.
But that's my other point, too.
That's true.
It's
not
happened
just
to
Stephen
his book.
King.
It's his screenplay.
It is his
screenplay, too.
Sure it is. Absolutely,
you know,
it is.
Like, I love a director that could take something in their own hands, but I mean, at the end of the day, not only is this a screenwriter's stuff should be respected, especially when it's the screenwriter who was the author of it. Maybe we should give him a little bit of credibility.
Well, I would give him plenty of credibility, most likely, if I hadn't seen, I don't know, some of the other films that he's had a hand in over the years. I don't dislike Clive Barker. I think Clive Barker is an important queer artist. I think Clive Barker has written some amazing works. I think you can look at Hellraiser. There's not a lot you can say about that that's negative. I mean, there is, obviously, but there's not a lot you can say there. But I'm just not beholden to, and I will say flat out, I have not read the Rawhead Rex book. I never felt compelled to. I got what I wanted from the film. And, but I think I just don't see the need to. I get that he's attached to it as the writer. He's attached to it all this, but obviously something happened at some point where the filmmakers were like, this ain't working. And I don't know. I wasn't there, but usually you don't just scrap, you know, someone who wrote the source material, wrote the screenplay. You don't just sort of go your own direction without there being a reason. Now, was that because of the video nasty stuff and the rating? Was that because maybe Barker was going a little too hard with the queerness or too hard with stuff that he, you know, goes really hard with? You know, I don't know. I can't evaluate what's not there. I don't want to evaluate what's not there. I want to evaluate what is there. And I think if you take the Clive Barker out of your brain as much as you can, I think it's actually a really effective monster movie. And so, you know, it's its own unique beast from beginning to end. You know, the things that you can find in there that are Clive Barker-esque, which are few and far between, but there are some things. Those are really more tonal than they are anything else. I'm sure this script that ended up on screen is, you know, vastly different than what Clive Barker wanted. But again, you know, they're making a film under, you know, pretty specific circumstances. And to touch on something you said earlier about the zero fucks to give, They had zero fucks to give in how they were making it, not in how they were releasing it. Releasing it, making it, releasing it are two different things. Like, you can make it with all the craziness you want to, but you've still got to find a way to find an audience for it. And so, those are two different things. And so I just don't feel the allegiance to Clive Barker as a creative. And so it's a lot easier for me to say, I don't care that this is not what he wanted. I don't think he always makes the best choices.
Okay. Did you want to rest on that, or did you have a further exhibit?
Oh, I think I can just save anything else for my closing statement.
Very well. Both sides have rested their case. Mr. Maynard, you may present your closing statement.
Your Honor, distinguished members of the court, somewhere out there is a timeline that exists where Rawhead Rex is an awesome cinematic parable about feminine and masculine sexual energy and their roles in both pagan and Christian religion and even society as a whole, especially the oppression of feminine sexual power, all wrapped up in a satirically ultra-violent, ultra-sexually charged rampage starring an enormous cock demon. But we do not live in that timeline. Instead, we live in a timeline where Rawhead Rex is a sexless, goreless, gormless film about a very fake-looking monster, made at the height of practical effects wizardry, who just sort of wanders around directionless and kills whatever barely developed characters he stumbles across, oftentimes off-camera. It's a neutered, watered-down version of not only Barker's short story, but of his script. And when you have incompetent filmmakers who fail to understand and execute the vision of both the original author and the screenwriter, you're doomed from the start. The themes are lost, the point is lost, the appeal is gone. So when you step into that jury room, don't go dicking around and cock this all up. Stand erect and give this a good stiff vote guilty. Thank you.
Oh, boo.
You'll have no trouble convincing me we're in the darkest timeline. Mr. Brewton, you may present your closing statement.
I don't have a fancy speech prepared. I'm not a man who sits around coming up with words and phrases to elicit the sympathies of the jury. I'm a man who deals in absolutes.
I'm just a simple country lawyer.
Your Honor, I'm just a caveman. I was thawed out of some ice a few years ago, and now I practice. Okay, no. Let me say this. I think it is quite telling that the prosecution spent, dare I say, 85% of the time talking about what wasn't there versus what was. And I think that's a trap that one falls into when they can't really dissect what's wrong with something. Now, there's probably a lot of things this film could have been that it isn't, but we're not going to know about those. Those are in the air. That's ephemera. What I do know is that I could give two shits about any sort of feminine sexuality in the film, because I read this as a sort of subversive take on repressed homosexuality. A very different read. Both reads are accurate, but that's the read that I took from it, even at a very young age. And I know that a lot of other people take that same read from it. And so, maybe that phallic idea is innately there for me. Maybe because I'm a homosexual. I don't know. That might be part of it. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people don't look at Rawhead Rex and think, oh, that's a big old dick. They probably look at him and think, oh, I saw that costume at Spirit Halloween last week. So again, I'm not here to defend the master crafting of that costume. I am here to defend that for what they had, I think that they use it as effectively as they could given the circumstances that they were under. Now, the word incompetent was used to throw around to the filmmakers. I think that's a bit unfair and I can't imagine that anyone would watch this and think that it was made by incompetent filmmakers. Now, you might have issues with decisions that were made, but incompetent is a pretty strong word. That seems like a desperate word that someone uses when they realize that their argument is a bit weak. And Clive Barker, the elephant in the room, I don't care. Clive Barker doesn't rock my world in any substantial way. He's made some good stuff. He's made some shitty stuff. I don't know that he's ever really understood the film business in any substantial way. And so the fact that maybe a group of people were like, we can't do this quite the way you want us to do, Clive, I think that's fine. I think Clive can I think he's fine without Rawhead Rex being made the exact way he wanted it to be made. Long story short, my hope is that in, 30 years, there's a 12-year-old boy somewhere sitting alone in his living room watching on whatever apparatus we're watching things on then. It certainly won't. It's probably going to be Laserdisc again. Laserdiscs are going to come back around. So this little queer boy is watching Rawhead Rex on Laserdisc. And I just hope that he got the same sense of sort of queer wonder that I got from watching this film at a young age, that honestly helped spark a lot of interest in not just monster horror, but also queer horror, and sent me down a rabbit hole of queer horror that has lasted to this day. And so would I want to see Rawhead Rex remade now? I think someone could really do a good job of remaking it. I think you could do some really cool stuff with it. I'm interested to see what they do with the new Hellraiser. But for now, we've only got one Rawhead Rex movie, and it's this one. And say what you want about it, but God damn it, it slaps.
You heard it here first. Physical media is coming back. Thank you both. Members of the jury, Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, and Mr. He was here before Christ. Before civilization, he was Ryan Luis Rodriguez. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict. If you ask me, Rawhead Rex makes Mortal Kombat's Goro look more like Michelangelo's David.
The bailiff and the judge sound awfully familiar.
Well, we interact with them at least once every 4 weeks.
Okay, so what are we thinking, guys? I want to hear from Dylan.
Wow, okay, so this case was probably a lot heavier than I thought it was going to be.
Me too.
Yeah. All right. So I think what is really an important point to address that they both brought up is Clive Barker's influence, and I can appreciate when you say, like, how can you ignore, like, when he wrote the story, he wrote the screenplay, and then you threw that all away, and this is the movie you got. And sometimes, that's convincing, sometimes it's not. And I think when you could say, look, you threw this away, and then he goes on to do Hellraiser, that's kind of like the Pretty Woman thing. It's like huge mistake, big, or whatever. So, that's kind of so I am a little sympathetic to that. But I think Billy Ray brings a good point. It's like, look, you don't need Clive Barker to make this movie do what they want to do, which in this case is a monster rampaging through the countryside and hedging its bets by being a little on the campy side, which I'm not a big fan. If that was a deliberate choice, I don't think that's good filmmaking. But if it is, as Billy Ray argued, that was something deliberate, it is an interesting way to look at the movie. Yeah, and then
how would you have looked at it if it were like a cock monster, like just blatantly a cock monster? Like, first of all, you'd know it's sort of a satire, right? I think you'd.
Well, I mean,
feel about the film differently than I did.
I mean, like, maybe if they kept, depending on how goofy it is, right? Because like the alien's a big cock monster, and it's horrifying.
That's true. True.
So I did look up some of the concept art, and it is unmistakably like a big penis head if you were to do that. So Google with care, Bobby.
As is, he does look like the Lost Guar character, like the one that never made it to stage. But I was really like, when we found out that we were doing this, I was excited simply because it had the word Rex in the title, so I thought it was about dinosaurs. It's not.
Dogs.
Just in case you've listened to this entire episode and didn't know that, there are no dinosaurs in this film.
Maynard mentioned the T-Rex costume, so I can see the confusion.
Yeah, technically, I guess, yeah. You get there in a technicality. There are technically dinosaurs in this episode, not in the movie.
Gotcha.
But I'm glad we had this conversation because it's been a month since I watched this movie, and I could remember nothing except for the fact that he pees on a guy. Which, when that happened, I was like, holy shit, I got to take my hat off to this movie. I was not enjoying it, but he does pee on a dude, R. Kelly style, and it's crazy. Ben, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I kind of had a similar experience to you. I just watched it. I found it very forgettable, with the exception of maybe a few scenes here and there. I did not get any of the reads these guys talked about. I did not see any. I wasn't thinking about it, any homosexuality or feminist tones. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention, but that wasn't there for me. It was more like the prosecution said, just a monster goes around and kills people, roll credits.
Well, I mean, if you don't see it, I mean, it's definitely, it's a subjective thing. So, going into it, you're not going to know, oh, this is the read. And of course, everybody's read is separate and different. And
they all go so far. Like, I don't know that any read like completes the whole film. It doesn't all make sense.
No, that's fair.
If you go in any direction.
So let's start locking in some votes. Dylan.
All right. Well, it was a good case. Both guys made some really, really good points. I liked the way Billy came at a lot of his argumentation. He had good answers, good responses for things. It's like, it was very easy to name off really good costumes, but there are some, it's not a great costume, but they do use it effectively here and there. And it is still a monster movie with, the rampaging and the killing. And then both of them admit that there's some deeper subtext to it, which could make it interesting on a rewatch. It's like when you watch Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, that's supposed to be the gay one, and then when you actually watch with that idea in mind, you really see it. So maybe rewatching Rawhead Rex with some of these different queer themes, maybe that makes it more interesting. Maybe it doesn't make it great, but I don't think we got to bad today, so I'm voting not guilty.
Ben?
If the film's measure of success is like eliciting the reaction it wants to out of me, I did forget about it, so that's not good. Also, anytime this thing killed anybody, I was thinking that's clearly a puppet. I was never like buying any of the horror going on. I think it had some interesting ideas. I was more thinking about like the religious aspect, how like people sort of reappropriate churches. I kind of like that as a theme, but it didn't really go anywhere. Also, the way they kill the monster at the end, it doesn't really, it doesn't connect anything before it. If they did go with the feminist theme, that definitely would have made a lot more sense. So,
well, it's not really dead at the end, is it? Its hand pops out.
That's true. I'm going to go guilty, and unfortunately that means Ryan gets to decide, and he throws curveballs.
Oh, this is fun. I love being in this position. I didn't care for this movie. I think that's quite obvious at this point. But in terms of delivering a case, I think both sides definitely brought it. But I think that Billy Ray's side actually made me start to reconsider this movie that I'd completely forgotten. So that's a plus? Question mark. So I'm going to go not guilty.
All right. Is that Judge handsome?
Oh, he's very handsome. Let's go tell that
guy. Let's go tell him. Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of the People versus Rawhead Rex, we find the defendant not guilty of being a bad movie.
Shenanigans!
Wow.
Very well. The verdict is so rendered, but I may be baptizing my own personal copy of this Rawhead Rex style, if you know what I mean. But this movie is free to go. Court is adjourned.
Judge is going to pee on a disc. Oh, it's fun.
This is Paul Lynn reporting live from the center square. Maynard Bangs, would you care to share your thoughts on the jury's verdict?
How's it doing? How are you doing, Paul? I liked this case, and I do have to agree that the defense brought a lot of arguments from a perspective that he experienced that I hadn't considered, and it did paint some of it differently. So I can see and understand the jury's thinking, and I also should not have underestimated Ryan's love for golden showers.
I never do that.
I knew that was gonna hurt me a bit. But anyway, I'll sleep well at night. But I do hope we get a really cockrific version of this film in the future.
You and me both, brother. Thank you very much. Here comes Billy Ray Brewton, baby. Excuse me, can we get a word on how you feel about today's verdict?
Yes, Paul. Nice to meet you. Paul Lynn here, talking for the defense. No, I'm so excited that Rawhead Rex has been found not guilty, that it will now and forever, throughout the sands of time, be known as a good movie. Which, every time I think about Rawhead Rex, just ripping into that annoying little bastard child of our protagonist, I know that makes a good movie. Whenever Rawhead Rex decimates a trailer park, that's what makes a good movie. And so I'm just, I'm overwhelmed. I'm on cloud 9 right now, and all I can say is that the jury made the right decision. Very much like the jury did in the O.J. Simpson case.
Oh, no.
Here we go. Well, thank you very much. That's all the time we have from the courthouse today. Circle gets the square. Good night, ladies and gentlemen.
See, and I get in trouble for the Scott Peterson jokes. Great case. Good job, Billy Ray.
Yeah, Billy Ray, you really brought it for this, and this movie needed someone to bring it.
It needed a champion. It needed a phallic champion, and I'm that phallic champion.
There it is. Now, what have you been up to lately? What's been keeping you busy?
Oh, goodness. Well, let's see. I run $3 Bill Cinema in Seattle, Washington, and we put on the Seattle Queer Film Festival in October of every year, so that has been keeping me busy.
That's upcoming.
I also program for the Skyline Indie Film Festival in Winchester, Virginia in September. That has also been keeping me busy. But I think the most, other than the podcast, I do the Incinerator Podcast and Movies with Gravy, both of which are still running. But Scripts Gone Wild is coming back, which a lot of people seem to be a fan of. We used to do pretty regular live shows, but then during the pandemic, we switched to virtual only. But we are coming back to live shows on August 24th at El Cid in Los Angeles. We are doing Creep Show with Barbara Crampton and a whole bunch of other fun people and some surprise
Kirk Thatcher, Jonah Ray, Deanna Rooney.
Yep.
Rico Anderson.
Rico is there, and we're going to be having some surprise guests there, too, that we'll announce closer to the
Stephen King.
I mean, look, we
No, just Clive Barker.
No. We wanted to get Joe Hill to do his dad's part. We were, really trying to get Joe to do his dad's part, but we just couldn't quite make it happen. But we are raising money for
surprise guest is Ed Harris.
I wish. We are raising money for the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, so raising money for a good cause should be a lot of fun. Tickets are available, scriptsgonewild.com.
Nice. Yeah, I've been to a couple of shows live, and it's really excellent. You get spit flying right on you. So if you ever want Jonah Ray to spit on you, there's your chance.
And
it's such a specific thing too. The virtual reads were great, but there's just such a different energy with a live audience. I'm excited to go back. So.
Yeah. And now, I thought that the Movies with Gravy podcast had been on hiatus and had come back. Did I get that information wrong?
It has been on hiatus. So basically, Movies with Gravy is changing formats later this year. And so it's a little sporadic on when it's dropping right now. But it'll get a little more consistent in the next couple weeks. And then that'll be pretty consistent until we actually change names.
Ooh.
Are you doing more from top to bottom?
We do have another From Top to Bottom coming up. We have one planned that I believe will be dropping in September, but we have not announced that one yet, but I think it will make people quite happy.
All right. No, it's very busy keeping stuff up. And we look forward to hearing this name change because it's got a lot to keep up with so far.
Oh, yes.
Now, we always ask for recommendations from our guests for a movie you think people should see. So what is a movie that people should see?
Well, I'm going to just go with the film. It's the only 5-star movie that I've seen in 2022. It's a documentary. It's called Fire of Love. And it is about 2 volcanologists, Katya and Maurice Kraft. And the whole film is compiled of the footage that they shot over multiple decades of basically tracking down volcanoes. And the footage that they get is incredible. It is mind-blowing. Miranda July does this incredible voiceover narration through the whole thing, which just kind of breaks your heart. You know from the very first minute of the movie that these people die doing what they love.
Oh, no.
But the documentary is I've just never seen anything quite like it. And so I would very much recommend Fire of Love, directed by Sarah Doza.
All right. Excellent. Good recommendation.
Hey, Maynard, you were the other lawyer. What's your recommendation?
So our film today, I know, our film today concerned a god, as some would call him, and he certainly struck me as being pretty mad. So I figured today I'd recommend 1984 Splash. No, I'm going to actually recommend Phil Tippett's Mad God from 2021. I've been sitting on this one for a bit, and if I don't recommend it now, Ryan will snatch it up from under me.
That is true.
Ryan. Phil Tippett started production on this stop-motion magnum opus like 30 years ago during the production of RoboCop 2, but then he shelved it for another 20 before finally coming back to it and completing it with a whole slew of enthusiastic volunteers. It's darkly comical, weirdly cynical, and beautifully bizarre. As far as the story goes, there kind of, sort of, really isn't one, but that doesn't matter. This film is more of a snapshot of a totally balls-crazy world of violence and cyclicality that Tippett has dreamed up, and more importantly, it's about the artful, seemingly dying, but somehow unkillable medium in which it was forged, stop-motion animation. Fans of Ray Harryhausen may find this one a bit too dark and pessimistic, but you still have to appreciate the craft. Mad God is currently streaming on Shudder. Support your local library. And I know Ryan loved it.
Oh, I adored it. Absolutely.
Adored it. And just for that, you get to go next. What's your recommendation?
Oh, yay! My recommendation this week is not necessarily a horror film. It's more of a thriller, but I have no idea what to call it. Depending on where you find it, it's known as Game Over, Deadly Games, and the most accurate title, Dial Code's Santa Claus. It's about a kid being terrorized in his mansion by a psycho in a Santa suit, so he sets up a bunch of improvised traps to defeat his pursuer. Sound familiar? Well, it was released in 1989, the year before Home Alone. Did John Hughes see this?
They stole it.
I guess we'll never know, or will we? Well, no, we won't, because he's dead. Whatever you call it, it doesn't seem to be streaming anywhere, but Vinegar Syndrome recently put out an outstanding 4K disc. Support your local library.
It's quite good. It's quite good. I've seen it many times, and I'm a big fan.
There you go. It's got 2 seals of approval. Now, I guess we could throw it to Big Ben, who apparently was our judge or something. But Ryan had wooed me with his charms. But
you sounded like the bailiff, though, apparently.
Hey, why does the bailiff ever recommend anything?
Because he knows what he did. Ben?
That's fair.
He only likes one movie, and it's obscene. So, my recommendation is only loosely related to Rawhead in that it's demon-focused, but I'm going to go with the J-horror classic Onibaba, or Demon Woman in English. It asks the age-old question, how far would you go to ensure your survival? And if your answer isn't up to and including psychologically tormenting your daughter-in-law with a demon mask in the cold midnight rain to scare her out of abandoning you for a new boy toy, you're not trying hard enough. It follows this mother-in-law and her daughter-in-law who don't really need to be associated anymore because the son/husband here has died in war, and the daughter is now very interested in getting frisky with another man. But this frightens the old mother-in-law because at her advanced age, there's no way she can survive on her own. But the more she dons this demon mask to scare her, the more she becomes like a demon herself. I would also be remiss if I didn't call out the amazing work with lighting and contrast that they do in this film. The word gets overused, but there's no way anyone can say to me that this image of a Japanese demon mask gliding over the black and white grass isn't iconic. You can currently find Onibaba on HBO Max and or the Criterion Channel.
What year was it?
Gotta watch this now.
62, I think.
Oh, I'm sold. I'll watch any Japanese horror, especially from the 60s.
I'll put it on my queue.
Yes. I'll put it on Ryan's queue, too.
Yes, we'll all put it on Ryan's queue.
Send us on home.
All right. Well, Rawhead Rex was a multiple rental in the Schlender household, but it really put me in mind of a horror movie that we probably rented the most, and that is 1987's The Gate. The Gate is about 2 young boys that accidentally open a
portal.
Gate, close. Gate to hell, and are plagued by demons and other scary stuff. The highlight of this film, like so many 80s gems, is its practical effects. The demon suits are much cooler and better looking than Rawhead, and the use of forced perspective to make them look tiny really lands. If you're itching for more 80s demons movies, this one needs to be at the top of your list. Or in the middle. What do I care? It's your list. Ryan.
No, that's a good call. Yeah, there are a lot of 80s movies about demons, but there should be more.
More 80s movies.
Yeah, let's go back to the 80s and make more of these movies.
Exactly.
It's Butterfly Effect, this bitch.
It's Star Trek 4, but we need demon movies.
Exactly. Someone get on that. And with that, we are all out of show, but we want to thank our guest, Billy Ray Brewton, for joining us. Thank you so much, Billy Ray.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me again, gentlemen.
And we can't wait to have you back again. Next time you'll have to defeat Dylan. That's it.
What? Bring it on, big boy.
And yes, it's Paul Lynde voices the entire time. You'll have to see if Paul Lynde ever did a movie. I don't know if he ever did. And
I'm going to make out with someone who has COVID before that one films.
Hey, just make out with someone, Ben, and we'll give you the day off.
Yeah, that's true.
But with that, we are all out of show, but we hope everyone will join us again next time as the Reels of Justice keep turning.
Count it.
Penises.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.